Welcome to Blog Talk Radio, Freedom Reigns, Episode 2, being hosted by Eternally Aware, that being myself, my given name being John, a human being with intrinsic rights. I'm glad you tuned in and are listening to the show today. There's a few topics that I want to get into. One being the fact that most of us, after last week, have been exposed to something that is new to them. They were not aware of the fact that human beings have rights and freedoms that are apart from any commercial rights that are in existence. Well, let's say this, for example. Most of us accept the fact that authority operates all around us. From when we're young, we're kids, we go to school, and we're taught that authority is something natural. We're taught that there's always going to be somebody in a position over us that can tell us what to do. So in a way, we're kind of being brainwashed. And in that way, we're being taught the fact that authority is there to control us. That's part of the essence of them removing your fundamental rights and freedoms, because they're teaching us that whatever you choose to do or whatever expression you want to do, there's a power greater that has a say against you. As we continue to grow up, like we go into high school and college, into the workforce and the like, we're constantly, again, surrounded by authority. So we never seem to question, why is it a fact that the government has the rights over us or has authority over us? Is everything good? Everybody can hear? So that just stems on into our human rights and freedoms. You see, because no one's questioning the fact that there's authority over us and telling us what to do. No one ever questions that, hey, do I have liberty apart from this? Why is it a fact that I have to listen to what these people are trying to yoke me to, or what this system is trying to do to me? So if you will understand, it's a big power that is against us. It's a big power that is working against us even from when we're young. So don't feel bad that you've never really known or never really understood that there were human rights and freedoms there for you to exercise. Now, when we're all born free, right? There's not really much that can lay claim to us when we're children. Although the government does do so by the issuance of a birth certificate, we are actually, as human beings, we are born free. And it's when the government comes through the registration of that act of birth that they're trying to lay seize upon the human being, that they're trying to I'm not sure if Deetra and Terry.
Hang on. Hello.
Hi. Is the show going?
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. You hear me speaking?
Yes, I hear you now. I'm good.
Okay. Wonderful.
Doing a great job, John.
So, like I was saying, when we're talking about human rights and fundamental freedoms, we've never been told this fact. So, the government, they lay a hold upon our human rights, or they lay a hold upon us as human beings. How do they do so? They come to your parents and they say to your parents, listen, you just gave birth to a child, and there's an obligation that we have that we want you to fill out these formulas. And when you fill out these formulas, then we're going to register the birth of your child. It's within that action, it's within the context of that action that the legal person is created. That is when the government creates that artificial being in law that has, if you will say, the same name as you or the similar name as you. Now, that legal person that was created in law, you're not told about, and neither is your parents. You just automatically assume that this is you, that this is who you are. So whenever you have any identification that has been given to you or being issued to you from the government, you don't question it. You just accept it. But it's really important to take note that it's at that time of registering your birth of your child that artificial person is created. Now look at this. The government actually forces you. They force you to take recognition as that legal person. Why? Because you're under threat that if you don't register your child and if you don't create that juridical personality, that person in law, through the act of registering your child, they're going to fine you. Here in Canada, they can fine you up to $50,000 for not filing that documentation. I'm not sure exactly how much they'll fine you in the States, but I did do some research this week, and you guys are under the same obligation that if you give birth to a child in the States, you are under obligation to register the birth of that child. Nowadays, they mostly do it automatically through the hospital. So that would be, if you will say, the first action that creates that legal person. So now you go to school, for example, you get to be 10 years old, and your parents need a Medicare card for you. So they're going to take that act of birth, that birth certificate that you got when you were registered, and they're going to apply to the government for something that's called a Medicare card or a medical card here in Canada. And that medical card is going to be issued to the person, to that juridical personality, not to the human being. And subsequent, any other piece of identification that you get or you acquire here in Canada is going to be issued to that juridical person, not to the human being. And that juridical person, like I said from last week, is the mechanism or the mechanics or the medium that the government use to strip you of your human rights and fundamental freedoms. So while a human being, for example, is born free and is recognized that it has the right or the capacity to remain free, a person in Canada is a subject or a servant of Her Majesty or of the Crown or of the system. So you see two different capacities or two different attributes that are in operation. One, the human being has the entitlement or the right to remain free and to be free, but the person that they created in law through your birth, through sees upon your birth, that person is a subject. It's controlled. Now, as you branch out from that way, there's a whole bunch of different ways that they continue to control you and to continue to take from your life and from your energy through using that juridical personality. Anything to add, Terry?
No, you're doing great.
Well, when you first learned about the juridical personality and the human being, like we were talking about before, and you saw the fact that, hey, there was a distinction in law, how did you feel about that they were hiding this from you, that they didn't expose us? It took some effort and it took some studying on your part to understand this. What was your first reaction?
Well, my first reaction, I was very angry. I thought, boy, have I ever been duped? And the second reaction was, that was brilliant. To tell you the truth, I thought the way that was constructed was ingenious, John. That's what I thought.
Yes, it took them a lot. It took them a lot of work to be able to hide our fundamental rights and freedoms. And the question that we asked, and me and Terry were speaking about prior to the show, was that they went through all this to hide our fundamental rights and freedoms, and not just take them away. You understand? They could have just said, okay, well, a human being has such and such right. Well, no more. We remove that right. But they never did that. And why? Why? What is the reason behind that? What's the thinking behind that? What's the motive behind that? Why didn't they just strip us of our rights and be done with it? Why hide them and say, well, if you're able to discover them, or if you go on a hunt or on a journey and find them, and you can exercise them?
Because it would be fraud. They had to put it in there.
Yeah, that's true. It would be fraud. But when we were talking, I had the opinion that these laws, they came into existence many, many years ago, many decades ago, even a few generations ago, if you'll say. And most of the thinking of men back then were very religious in context. And they knew that all men, all human beings, have certain rights and freedoms. These are inalienable freedoms that were given to us by our Creator, whatever you want to term Creator, or by natural law. They're just there because after years and years of experience, after years and years of living together, we learned what is right and what is wrong, how we should treat one another. And these rights were brought into existence, and these men, I believe they feared eternal punishment. I believe that they felt that if they stripped us of these rights and freedoms, that when they passed away, they would have no excuse before their God that they believed in. Because remember, all this stems from the Christian doctrine or the Christian belief. And we won't really get into how many different Christian doctrines there are out there, but it stems from the fact that they believe that whoever is ignorant, let them be ignorant. And whoever is intelligent or just, well, let them be intelligent and just. And if they place you into ignorance, well, there's no accountability on their back. The accountability for you staying a slave, or for you staying in servitude, or for you operating under a person which is beneath your rights as a human being, it's your accountability, not theirs. Because they left the way open for you to use, they left the door there for you to walk through, but because you didn't do due diligence, you didn't find that door. So the blame comes back upon you, not upon them.
I know, but John, isn't it true in the beginning that even if you wanted to exercise them, or if your parents didn't register you, that they would be fined?
Well, that's exactly right, and therein lies where Canada is failing as a state party to international laws, where they are trying to force the people to register the birth of their child. Well, what they do is they approach you as the person, as the Canadian citizen, and they say, you are a Canadian citizen, you are that artificial person in law. As such, you have an obligation. We created an enactment that you are under obligation to follow as a Canadian citizen, which places an obligation upon you to register your child. And if you don't, we can subsequently fine you such and such amounts. But they're not approaching the human being. So if prior to them ever contacting you, you had taken a claim of recognition or a claim for designation here in Canada, they couldn't use or they couldn't hold you to that enactment to force you to register your child. But when you are registered as a child, it's a two-way street here, because they become your guarantor as your human rights and fundamental freedoms. As we talked about last week, some, not all, but some of our human rights and fundamental freedoms, for them to be expressed, for their expression to find fulfillment here in Canada, it takes a monetary value. It takes you to be able to have a monetary backing to fulfill those needs, such as a human being has the right to housing, a human being has the right to clothing, a human being has a right to food, and a human being has a right to the continued improvement of his or her living condition. Now, these are all rights that would require a monetary backing, and Canada is under obligation to provide that monetary backing. So what they do is, when they register your child, the first document that they create is called an act or a registration of a live birth. That is when they register the human being. Secondarily, they create the certificate of birth or the act of birth. That is when they create the artificial person. That documentation is your guarantee. It is your, if you will, it is your share. It is your recognition of the fact that Canada has an obligation towards you, and they are there to fulfill an obligation towards you. Now, the problem is that the obligation that they have towards you as a human being, they nullify by rendering you that person in law. So therefore, any rights and freedoms that you had as a human being that Canada would be under obligation to fulfill, the obligation now falls aside because they are not recognizing you as a human being. They've designated you and rendered you a person, therefore they have no more obligation to that. Now, you create a problem when you realize what's going on, and you turn around and say, well, hang on, I don't want to be recognized as that legal person. I don't want to take recognition or enter into recognition as that legal person. I want to stand under the designation of a human being with all his rights or her rights and freedoms attached thereof. And now there's a problem because their system is not in function. Their commercial system is not in operation to minister to the needs of a human being. It's only been put into operation to minister to the needs of that Canadian citizen, that legal person. Following?
Yeah, so John, if we wanted to rectify this problem, how would we go about doing it? The claim of right would be first, yes, but if we wanted to do a constitutional challenge, would we be able to do that?
On an individual level, or on like a more
on a mass scale?
It's possible to do a constitutional challenge on a mass scale, but you have to understand procedures of law, and you can't have thousands and thousands of people showing up before court. And neither can you have, if you're going to do a class, what you would title a class action lawsuit, neither can you have a human being or someone who is not a member of the justice system, meaning the barrow, to be representative of that case. So if you would want to have a successful constitutional challenge for something that's affecting a number of us, one or two individuals have to go in there and succeed. And that will create jurisprudence for the rest who are aware. They can act upon that after.
Okay, so now you have that procedure on your flower page on Internally Aware, correct?
I don't actually have any procedure I have certain procedures. I do share information about what the Canadian law says concerning about how to launch a constitutional challenge for your human rights, what courts you need to go to, what codes you need to invoke, who you need to notify. But specifically for a global constitutional challenge for province per province, no. That's something that has to be worked upon, that I've been working upon personally for maybe over a year or a year and a half now. And it's a goal that I have in my own life that I would like to do that. I'd like to be able to go against the 110 individuals that it would take, because there's 110, if you will say, offices that would have to be served here in Canada in order for this to work, because each province has its own power or its own executive council. Because the way the structure of the law is set up in Canada, the Constitution Act granted the executive power over Canada to each province has their own executive council, and it's that executive council that is responsible for human rights and fundamental freedoms and their exercise and their fulfillment here in Canada. So we would have to bring all those individuals into court, charging them with the fact that they're failing in their duties and in their responsibilities. But you have to understand that in a lot of ways, and I'm not giving credit here to Canada, but in certain ways, when you look into the enactments, as we were talking about before, Terry, they did provide the means for you to exercise your human rights and your fundamental freedoms, but it's hidden in the enactment itself. And unless you know what to look for, and unless you know what you're searching for, you could pass right by it. In fact, if you look here in Quebec, we have something that governs the population. It's called the Quebec Civil Code, and it states that in the Quebec Civil Code that the common law is in there. It's in there explicitly or by implication. So they're telling you directly that the common law is there, but you got to figure out how it applies to your rights and freedoms.
Now, would you be doing that on everyone's behalf if you went against them, or is this for you personally?
Well, if I won my case, if I was able to get together the means to do all this and I won my case, the jurisprudence on that case would be reflective upon all those who are seeking their rights and freedoms in Canada. But you need to understand that the nature of a case like this is it's very time consuming, and there's a lot of jeopardy attached to a case like this. Because if you subsequently fail in your attempt, the legal fees that you will be left with will bankrupt you, or will you understand it will destroy you. You'll have nothing left. So if you are ever going to do a challenge, a global, a provincial or a Canadian challenge, and you're going to challenge some article of law or some operation of law that's in existence, that shouldn't be there, because you know that Canada is bound by certain obligations that they're not fulfilling, you got to make sure that you dot all your I's and cross all your T's before you get in there. Because, you know, the ones higher up in the court, they understand what's going on here in Canada. The lower ones, they don't know about fundamental rights and freedoms. But those sitting in the positions of authority higher up, they know about all this. And they're not going to be very happy that you're coming before them saying, hang on a second here, there needs to be a mega change done here in Canada. And this is what we're trying to do by presenting this case. If they wanted it all exposed, if they wanted us all to just have these rights and freedoms and just to use them, well, they wouldn't have hidden them. You understand? They would have then just they would have just brought them out forthwith and freely before all to use. But they didn't. Like we said last week, they only disseminate $3 million to teach us Canadians about human rights and freedoms. But they can spend tens of millions of dollars to check horses that race around tracks to make sure they're not on drugs to enhance their performances. It's not because Canada, I mean, I can't speak on behalf of Canada, but I don't think it's because Canada doesn't respect or doesn't want to respect human rights and freedoms. It's because they just want to hide them.
Yeah, so you're saying if you do that, they can't hide anymore. Is that what you're saying? Like if you bring that before them?
If anybody understands their rights and freedoms and successfully launches a challenge against them, if they were to win, now you got a problem there. It's a two-way street, because if you look into the Court Justice Act, and that's the Federal Court Act or the Federal Court Act itself, you're going to see that if it gets too hot on the courts, and if they're seeing that there's too much information that's being exposed within the court, they'll seal the record. Whatever is being recorded in that court, The judge is going to order it to be sealed, and he's going to do it on behalf to protect the public.
Isn't that just special?
Yeah. You find all that type of operation of law going on. Even when you look at the Financial Administration Act, and we were talking about this a little bit last week concerning appropriations or instruction for payments out of Canadian Consolidation Fund. It states that once the minister receives these instructions, that once it's done and it's completed, he could destroy the records. No questions asked. Why? Because in destroying the records, then there remains no paper trace. And that, if you want to go on even more, you look into the Justice Acts within every province, and you see that the judges that operate in the justice system, they're sworn to an oath. They're sworn to an oath of secrecy. And even more, there's a council of higher judges than just the average judge who are even they've taken even more oaths, if you can say it in that way, because of the things that's been revealed to them in their duties and in their offices. Because, like I said, a lawyer most lawyers don't understand about fundamental rights and freedoms of the human being. They're not taught that in the secular education they get. They're not taught that in the education that the barrow or the government provides for them, even though it was an obligation. Even though, as Canada being a state party to these international covenants, the Declaration of Rights and Responsibilities says that Canada had the obligation to train lawyers, to train police officers, to train public officials and government agents, and even the military, concerning the expression of human rights and freedoms on this territory. But they failed miserably. They failed completely. And the only one reason why they don't, it all comes back to money. Because you as a human being, then they owe you an obligation. They got to empty out of the Canadian Consolidation Fund for you. But you, as a Canadian citizen, as a person, you pay them. You pay taxes, you pay license and fees, you pay permits, and all this money is collected and thrown back into the Consolidated Revenue Fund and used on behalf of Her Majesty or on behalf of the government.
Wow, that's just so special.
It's sad to see. It's horrible to see that this is what's going on. Why? Because the whole crock of this is that they created a system where instead of having a beautiful country where people could be living a freer life and living, if you will say, not for what we're living for right now, chasing the high mighty dollar, we could have a totally different system in operation, but we don't. Why? Because from the beginning, the system was meant to create slaves and subjects for what? The 1%. Because that's what it does. Who in their right mind, sitting here, who in their right mind would say that, well, somebody has the right to control me? Somebody has the right to consider me their subject and their servant and basically their slave. And they have the right to tell me what I can and cannot do. Nobody. Most of us would laugh and say, that's ridiculous. No one can do that. This is 2013. Who has the right to do that? Well, wake up. Because that's exactly what's going on in the Canadian laws. This is exactly what they've done to us. But yet we're lulled asleep. How? By chasing, because we have to earn that living and run after the finances. So that's the most important thing. Everything else is secondary. Until the system grabs a hold of you with its hands. Until the system tries to take from you in a major way or hurts you in a major way. Then you start to question, well, hey, how come this happens? Hey, how come they have this power?
Yeah, unfortunately that needs to happen sometimes. Somebody has to get beaten up real bad for them to wake up.
That's for sure. That's for sure.
So how do we get, what do you say is the main problem? Isn't it not the banks?
How would the main problem be the banks? The main problem is the fact that the executive powers here in Canada, the executive councils of each province and of Canada, they're allowing laws to be passed that are not respecting their obligations internationally or their obligations as, if you will say, for human beings. Now, they're banking on the fact that nobody's going to know, and secondarily, that no one's going to try and go for their rights and freedoms. You see, like we said last week, if you don't know that your rights and freedoms are there, you're never going to claim after them. If you don't know that, go ahead.
But even if you do claim them, do you not get a hard time just the same with them?
Well, of course. Of course. I mean, if you turn
it's an uphill battle. It's an uphill battle to get them to respect them as well.
Well, I'm sure back in the day, we go back 300-400 years ago. I'm going back far, far for a reason, but if we go back 300-400 years ago, when the slave wanted to be released from his master, I mean, he didn't just walk up to the master and say, "Hey, Mr. Master, can you please let me go? I want to go now." No. If he wanted to get away from his master, you know what he did? He cut the chain off when his master was sleeping, and he took off across the field, and he ran like hell. And he got into the forest, and he tried, and he kept on going, and he ran into the ditch, and he ran through the water, and he just did all that he could to get away. And well, that's the same type of situation that we are stuck in here in Canada. Once we come to realize and understand that we've been rendered subjects and servants through that designation of Canadian citizen, our human rights and fundamental freedoms are not being met, and we want to now change recognition and hold Canada accountable towards us. Get ready to fight. And you have to fight. If not, then, keep your mouth shut and go with the flow. Any old dead fish, can swim down the stream with the current, but it takes one with a backbone to swim up against the current. And it's the same way here with our human rights and freedoms. And we have it, we suffer, how you will say that, we suffer these, if you will say, injustices against our human rights and freedoms in Canada with words and with operations of law that they've done against us. There's other countries that suffer where people are murdered on the street, shot dead. No respect for the human life. No respect for rights and freedoms of a human being. Just because the guy has a big gun, he can point it at you and command you to do something, and if you fail and he wants, he'll pull that trigger and take your life. Well, we have that here in Canada too. The government of Canada, they want to render you the person, the Canadian citizen, and they want you to operate in a certain way, and they want you to do certain things. And if you don't do it, and if you don't fall in line, well, they have their police force that'll jump on your back, or they have the justice system that'll try and jump on your back and say, "Oh no, you have to. You're under obligation." And that's what we're facing here. Some people think that human rights and fundamental freedoms, like I said, atrocities against it or attacks against it is only when someone shoots you or only when someone does physical harm to you. No, there's a lot more than just that. We've been misled to understand what our rights and freedoms are. And yeah, we're really being held in bondage here in Canada. And just that example of what happened to Dean Clifford, and the fact that he's now sitting in solitary confinement because of his political views, because of the fact that he expresses that he doesn't want to be recognized as a Canadian citizen, as part of this system, and he wants to stand as a free man. And they don't like his political opinion, so they're dropping the hammer on him. That's horrible.
Yeah.
Those actions are against human rights and freedoms. And nobody wants to say nothing about it. The politicians, they want to close their eyes and look the other way. Those who are part of the justice system, well, first of all, they're not really aware of all that's transpiring, and when they are, they say, well, we can't do much about it. There's nothing much that we can do because it's bigger than just me, or it's bigger than just a few of us. And I understand where they're coming from, but what's it going to take to make the change then? It's going to take...
Exactly. What is it going to take? All of us to stand?
Yes, it's going to take each and every one of us on an individual level to get out of this commercial system, to get away from the way they're trying to make us lead our lifestyle, which is chasing that mighty dollar bill and chasing the material goods of this world. Step back and begin to understand about our rights and freedoms and then claim them on an individual level. Because the more people that claim them and the more people that express them and start operating on them, the more they can't deny it. And the more they have to provide a measure or a means for this expression to come about in Canada. And that's the only way I can foresee a change on a national level happening in Canada.
So you're saying each individual at a time, not all of us, like a revolution, all of us standing up and saying that's enough.
Well, you can stand up in a revolution, that's fine. But, a revolution is only as strong as its weakest point. You understand what I'm trying to say there? A revolution is only as strong as its weakest point. The ones in your group that don't understand about rights and freedoms, that are just along because, for whatever reason it may be, they're going to bring you down. When you understand who you are in an individual level and you make your claim and take your recognition and then fight for your rights, that's your expression of your human rights and fundamental freedoms. That's your expression of your understanding, and no one can take that away from you. And if it's challenged, you can defend against it. So if we have many of those individuals in a group, yeah, that's great. That's wonderful. But you can't forego the first condition of having individuals strong and rooted in their understanding making a group. You can't just say, well, let's make a group, and if there's some weak or some strong, well, it doesn't matter. No, that's not what it's about. When you look at human rights and freedoms, it's very clearly what is articulated. It's for you, apart from anything else, apart from the commercial system, apart from Billy, apart from Bob. Yeah, Billy and Bob have the same rights as you, but you have these rights, and you have to understand them, and you have to exercise them. And if you don't, nobody will on your behalf. You okay?
Yeah, I'm listening.
So that's what it's really going to take. It's really going to take individuals. They can come together as a group, but individuals learning how to express these rights and freedoms and making their claims one-on-one. That now for themselves. So now the government has many, let's say 5 million individuals in Canada taking their recognition. They can't deny this. And they know that each one of these 5 million individuals or human beings understands their rights and freedoms. It wasn't a copycat. It wasn't because they wanted to escape some financial burden that was on their back. It wasn't because they wanted to escape some legal problem that they created as a Canadian citizen that they did this. They did this because they were exposed to human rights and freedoms, and it made a change in their heart and in their understanding about what life is really about and about what we should be doing here on an individual level, not because of what the system's telling us that we need to live.
But John, if we do that, do they not still remain in alleged authority?
The only authority that they have over, you have to acknowledge common law authority. If you don't acknowledge common law authority or common law, then I have a personal problem with that. And you're basically saying that, you can do anything you want. So you could take up a gun and kill anybody, or you could steal from somebody, or you can assault somebody, and there's no rule of law against you. I'm against that. And I understand common law to be the expression of law that men have learned over the generations of life. You understand? We learned that, hey, we shouldn't punch another man in the face just for no reason. Hey, we shouldn't steal from our neighbor because it's not proper. These are laws that we learned through experience, through living with one another. Those are laws that we are accountable to. Those are laws, if you will say, that rest upon a human being. The rest of that commercial, it's non-existent. It has no application upon our lives, except for the fact that it's making them rich and taking from us. It's damaging us, it's damaging our pocketbooks, and it's damaging, if you will say, our relationships, because we got to invest so much of our time to be part of this commercial system that we have no time left for our families and for our loved ones.
Yeah, I have a question here on Skype, John. The UN is currently deciding if they are going to make Sharia law as the law for the U.S. Many do not know this. Right now, we have 35 active Sharia law courts here in the U.S.
Okay.
So that's basically a comment.
Yes. Well,
not a...
I do know what Sharia law is. I have studied the Quran, and I am familiar with the belief system that is attached to the Quran. And Sharia law, to me, is not an expression of human rights and fundamental freedoms.
So what happens if this takes place, they're saying? Then what?
Sorry, my microphone unplugged. What happens if this takes place? Well, I don't know. That's just speculation. I don't like to speculate. I guess if they were able to succeed and incorporate Sharia law into America, I guess they're going to fall into civil war, because I know there will be a lot of people that will not stand for that.
Yeah, I guess some of them don't know, though. Most of them.
Well, I mean, it's difficult when you talk about religion, because, like I always say to those who listen to my videos, every religious person believes that their way is the right way. So the Muslims, they believe that their Sharia law, their Quran, that is the right way. It's the way to God, and everybody else is mistaken. Now the Catholic, he believes the same thing. His book is perfect. His book is the way, and his religion is the way, and everyone else is wrong. And the Pentecostal is the same way, and the Baptist is the same way. So you got many individuals out there that are carrying around a religious belief, and each of these beliefs, they contradict one another, but they all believe that their way is the only way. And I mean, I just try to stay away from all that because that really doesn't profit our society. It doesn't profit, my fellow human beings. In fact, I believe it creates more division than anything.
I'm just continuing. I just have some more questions coming in.
No, that's fine.
Yeah.
So, as a human being, you have, let's say, for example, a trust that has been set up for you. It's not really a trust as to say that you can say you go to a bank and there's a bank account for you and you can access that bank account. No. There is, in Canada, something that's called the Consolidated Revenue Fund. This is where all public money goes. This is where all money goes in Canada. In Canada, it's not like the States. In the States, you have, if you look on the dollar bill, it says this note is good for private and public debt. In Canada, it doesn't declare that on our money. In Canada, all money is for public use. And all money, or if you will say all monetary value, extends from the Canadian Consolidated Revenue Fund. Our security or our monetary backing as a human being for our rights and freedoms has been deposited into that Canadian Consolidated Revenue Fund. Now, each government province is granted a certain amount of money each year to fulfill their public systems. Now, the public system is what they are using, if you will, to support their Canadian citizens or their subjects that are present on this land. The public system is not an expression of your human rights and freedoms. It falls very much short. So you, as a human being, when you're in need or when you need something, you can access your security. You can access that patrimony through the Consolidated Revenue Fund. The problem is, as we begin to speak about last week, is on our birth certificates or on our act of birth, specifically here in Quebec, they title us, they designate us as children. That security that is there for us is designated to a child. And a child doesn't have any legal rights to operate under their security. So what they do is they attach a constructive registered holder. It's just a fancy way of saying someone who controls your security. And that person, they take your finances and they use it for the benefit of the government instead of the benefit of your human rights and fundamental freedoms. And they legally have the authority to do this because of the fact that they were given this right or duty through trust law. Now, the problem with this is that this registered holder, he's operating and he's taking all of your finances and using it on their behalf without letting you know. And when you notify him, you have the ability to notify him and let him know that the security that he's operating that bears your name, whatever your name may be, is no longer a security that is in operation for a child. That child is now become an adult. And as an adult, you have the right to access your patrimony. You have the right to use your patrimony. Now, you are limited in the way you can use that patrimony from what the law says. Because the law says that that patrimony is used for the fulfillment of your human rights and fundamental freedoms. So you can use them to discharge any need against your human being. Any need. Now, there's a qualification, not any want. Now, some people ask me, well, how can we justify this? Well, if the Canadian government feels that it is necessary to pay $325 a day to house a federal prisoner in federal prison, I think you as a human being are worthy for just as much amount of money. Would you agree?
Well, certainly.
So, when you notify the government of the fact that you are an adult, you are a living human being, and as such you want access to your patrimony, you have a justification to use for the amount that you seek. People think that the patrimony or the security of the person that is available in Canada is a huge amount of money that you can get your paws upon and just spend it in any way that you want. And I have not seen that. I have not seen that in any of the enactments or anything that I've read in law, that is available to us. I know as, if you will say, a holder of a security, you should be allowed to have complete access to that security. However, due to the nature of the guarantee that is attached to the security, I think there is a specific trust law that is governing our security. Do you understand what I mean? Because the security is specifically to meet the fundamental rights and needs of the human being, it's not in context the same as a security you would buy if you purchase it from a stock market. So you can hold onto that security, bring it before the government and say, you're my guarantor. You're my guarantor for such and such rights. Well, to fulfill such and such rights, it takes this amount of money. Here's the justification. Now release that for me. And that's the operation of law that is available to you. Do they want you to use it? Heck no. They want you to earn a living and pursue after a living. They don't want you to enjoy a living. Because a human being, again, we spoke about it last week, he has the right to enjoy a living. But a person, they're under obligation through the system that's been created to pursue after a living or to earn after a living. And when you earn or pursue a living, you are actually making money for them because they tax you and they remove from your wealth to take for themselves.
I have another question, John. Has anybody ever gotten to this point?
Have we gotten to this point? Getting access to their patrimony? Yes. Yeah. Very, very much so. But as I'm saying, it's not access where you get millions of dollars. It's very clear. Anybody who is in Canada right now can go into the Financial Administration Act. It's a federal enactment and can read about appropriations and requisitions and the two types of operations of law that are available to access the Consolidated Revenue Fund. Those are the only two operations of law that are available. There's no other keys, there's no other doors, there's no other ways to access the Consolidated Revenue Fund. One is a requisition, and that is done for a government agent, for a person, a requisition. The other is, if you will say, an instruction for payment or an appropriation. And that, listen to the wording, appropriation. Now go into the Civil Code of Quebec, Article 2, it says that every person's patrimony can be appropriated into a specific purpose for a public reason. And when you come back now to the fund where it's been appropriated to, where it's been placed, when it talks about how you can get access to it, it uses the same wording. It says that you can make an appropriation out of this fund.
Now, the first one you said is for your person?
Requisition, yes. In the Financial Administration Act, it speaks about a requisition. A requisition is a payment request that is sent from a person. You could title it from a government minister, from a different government body, from whatever type of person, but it's sent from a person. And then an instruction for payment for appropriation, again, listen to the wording. Who would use such an operation of law?
For a human being.
Exactly. Well, you just need to make the reference with the article, Quebec Civil Code, Article 2, or even the Quebec Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms, Article 1, where it says every human being has personal security. And then in Article 2 of the Quebec Civil Code, it states that we all have a patrimony, but that patrimony can be appropriated to a specific purpose for public reasons. And
now, if a person were to access that, and a human being, one is the instruction for payment. What would be the first?
For a person to access it, it's a requisition, and you couldn't do that because if you try to access the Consolidated Revenue Fund as a person, you don't have the right. We don't have the right. Only government ministers or subsequent, if you will say, persons, ministers of the government that have been given the authority to access this can make a charge off of it. If we would try to make a charge off of it as a person, as our juridical personality, they're going to say there's a constructive registered holder still on that, or they may even say you don't have the ability to do that because it's only a requisition can only be made. That's the difference for public means. You understand? For public reasons. But an appropriation and instruction for payment is being made for the human being. For the human
so really
right.
there's one way that we can access it then.
Exactly.
Through the human being.
There's one way for us, but there's two ways to access it in general, but there's one way for us. Hopefully that the people that are listening to this blog talk radio have seen some or hopefully all of the videos that I have placed on YouTube and have a good foundation or a good understanding about what's transpiring here in Canada, because that is an important process. It is an important fact. You must have a good foundation before you go forward. A lot of people are interested in making a constitutional challenge for their rights and freedoms. And this is something that is possible to do in Canada. Once you understand that you've been stripped of your right and freedom, you can go forth then and make that constitutional challenge either in the Superior Court of your province, the Federal Court of Canada, or the Supreme Court of Canada. And each one of these courts, you're going to have to use a different operation of law. Well, the operation of law is basically the same, but the form or the papers that you file will be slightly different. Slightly different. A constitutional challenge works like this. We'll use, for example, let's say we're going to start with the basic one. I don't want to be recognized as a Canadian citizen, and the only time that I want to be recognized as a person or a Canadian citizen is when I choose. Okay. Now, I get sent an income tax request. They sent me a tax request saying that they want me to pay taxes and they're challenging me and they want to seize my property or whatever. At that point, that's when you launch a constitutional challenge. Now, hopefully, as I said, you've watched some of my videos, or all of them, the ones that are on YouTube, and I've done some videos about income tax. So you'll have a basic understanding about what's going on. But there's an obligation upon Canada that states that a person, or a human being, we have no obligation to pay an income tax. It doesn't really state it in those wording, is what I just said, but that's basically what it's saying. What it states is that you don't have any obligation to give away of your resources to any international obligation, okay, or any obligation that is there for the public. Now, that is exactly what income tax is, or what they structure it to be. They say that they are collecting taxes on behalf of the public to run the public systems, and that you are under obligation as a person to pay into this system, to pay your part into this system. Well, that clearly goes against your freedoms, your rights that are expressed in the international covenants. You don't have to give in to your natural wealth into these systems. So they continue to push the point against you. What you would do is launch a constitutional challenge. You would notify the Attorney General of your province and notify the Attorney General of Canada. You would subsequently, if you went to federal court, lay a charge naming the Attorney General and Her Majesty as co-defendants in this charge, and you would invoke your rights that you find in the domestic and international charters. And you would back it up by jurisprudence, by court cases that are already out there that give you the right to do this. There's a few examples on my YouTube or at my website, eternallyaware.com. That would be the steps to doing that. Now, your argument would be, for example, you could walk and call on Article 2 of the Constitution Act of Canada, 1982, that states that everyone, which is a human being, has the freedom of association. And they're refusing to allow you that freedom of association because they want you to be rendered, or they want you to associate as that Canadian citizen. So you can invoke that right in the charter, and you can say that Canada, or whichever government system, the income tax system that is coming at you, is trying to force you to be in association with it. And you could successfully defeat that. You can successfully walk away from that. Why? Because it's your fundamental right. And you see, you don't know. We never knew that there was a right that was guaranteed to us, that we have no obligation to have to pay into these public systems or to pay into international obligations, which again is the tax system. But when you come to understand that you have that freedom that is there for you to exercise, then you just need to go before those in the de facto authority or before those in the authority here in Canada and say, listen, there's a right that I want to express. And I like to say this to people is when you go before any court and you begin to exercise your rights and freedoms as a human being, you realize that that's your duty. You may be doing it for whatever reason, maybe because you're mad at the system, or like I said, the system has hurt you and you want to escape it. And that's fine. I'm not here to judge anybody. But when you actually go before the court and you say, listen, I'm a human being and there's rights and freedoms that I have that I'm supposed to be able to exercise, and they're not allowing me to exercise that, and I'm standing up before you and I'm saying, listen, let me exercise them. Listen, let this expression of law, let this expression of freedom be exercised here in Canada. You're actually doing your duty as a human being. You're protecting and promoting human rights for more than just yourself, for future generations. That's a wonderful thing. It's beautiful to understand what's going on when you do that. But when you approach the courts in that way, I mean, they then have even more of a responsibility to respect you. You understand? Because you're coming now like, listen, I'm exercising my duties as a human being, which is why I have these rights. And these rights are in jeopardy. And I'm coming before you stating, listen, Mr. Judge or Mr. whatever you want to call him, here in Canada now, there's a problem. There's a problem. These rights are in jeopardy and they're not being respected. And out of all the nations in the world, you would think that this first world country in 2013 called Canada wouldn't be doing such actions.
Okay, John, I have a question here for you. Why would we be going to ask courts that are operating in fraud for our fundamental freedoms? I think they're saying. Didn't finish.
Okay.
I guess the court system is in fraud, so why would we be asking them?
I guess if you use that reasoning, I guess you wouldn't go to the grocery store neither, because there's people who practice fraud at the grocery store. No?
Mm.
Well, you have to go to the court system. And yes, the court system are practicing fraud on you. I agree. You cannot say that the court systems are not practicing fraud on you, because they've rendered you a person. You've been rendered a person, or that Canadian citizen, that subject in law, and they're operating upon you under that designation. So in one way, yeah, they haven't told you that there's another designation. Well, let me ask you this. When you go to the court and you go before them and you invoke your human rights and your fundamental freedoms, and you say just that, you've been deceiving me, or I've been deceived, or I was ignorant myself, and you've been operating upon me as a person. Now I realize the difference. Now I want to stand and take recognition as that human being. Well, what do you think is going to happen? You understand? You've just confronted the fraud. You've just confronted that which was being done to you before them. That judge may not understand. He may understand only 20%. You're going to have to climb higher up. Eventually, you're going to get to hopefully the Supreme Court, or maybe one of the higher courts, the federal court. And those judges, they know clearly what's going on. But you have no choice. You may call the court systems fraud. You may call them you may call them fraud, and I wouldn't even really term them fraud, because in the way that they're operating, they're giving you disclosure, are they not? If you go and read the Court Act, and if you go and read all the enactments that pertain to their justice system, they've disclosed what they're doing. They maybe haven't disclosed it in such a detailed level that you can understand it by just a quick glance of what you're reading. No, but if you take the time to study and read and learn, then you're going to see exactly what's going on. I can. Others have. Many others have. You can too. So how can you say to them, well, you're operating in fraud? The only way that you can say to them, well, you're operating in fraud, is to say that you're not telling me, you're not revealing to me that there's another designation for me to stand under. And they're going to say back to you, well, that wasn't my responsibility. That was your responsibility. Why is it my responsibility to tell you of your rights and freedoms? It's not. You understand?
Yeah, I just want that person, if she can, retype the question, please.
They have the obligation to respect fundamental rights and freedoms. There's a difference. Listen, they have the obligation to respect it, but they should be promoting it. They should be teaching it, and they don't. And they don't tell us. So when we get into court and we bring it up before them, we place the obligation before them. And that facade, that if you will say whatever fraud you're talking about, is exposed before them. Now, like I said in the beginning of the show, when you do that, get ready for a fight. No master wants their slave to go free.
Okay, another question. Isn't it better that the system collapse and restructure itself the proper way?
I agree with you 100%. I believe that to reset the system, it would take that. But are we going to make the same mistakes that we've made before? Who knows? But yeah, that would be one way to really reset the system, and there will be much suffering if that would happen. Many people could possibly lose their lives. Many human beings could die. But I mean, if it needs to happen, it needs to happen, because as it stands right now, the system is not good, in my own opinion. I mean, there's others who cherish it and love it. They like capitalism. I don't believe that they fully understand their position in the system. And if they did, and if they understood what rights and freedoms were available to them, they would see that they're sitting in the short end of everything. But
well, maybe those are the people that haven't gotten beaten up yet.
No, that's it. I agree with you. So there is eternallyaware.com, right? I have my own website, and it's where I teach about fundamental rights and freedoms of the human being and what's transpiring in Canada. And I have this page. It's called the Flower Power? Yes, the Flower Power page. And you can go there and read what's written on the Flower Power and do what's written there if you'd like. How's that, Terry?
That's good. That shows what can be done. You can also you wanted to do that in your personal life, but you wanted to do it as a whole as well, did you not?
Oh, yes, that's for sure. I mean, we all of us here in Canada, if we don't stand up, if we don't make a change, then, I'm afraid it's just going to continue the way it has been.
So we can designate a couple of people to do this constitutional challenge. Is that what you're saying? Would that be better for a couple of people instead of 200 or 1,000?
Well, there's an old saying that too many cooks spoil the broth. And when you're going into court, like I said, with all these heavy consequences on it, you'd be better off to make sure that anything that you're going to sign your name to, that it came from you. Don't place the responsibility upon someone else. It's not to say that we shouldn't share one another's burdens, but this is not as here. My bag is heavy. Can you carry it, please? Or I need a cup of sugar. Can you please have a cup of sugar? This is serious. If you're going to launch a constitutional challenge on your own behalf, like I said, it's not as difficult as some people are portraying it to be. It's once you understand the operations of law that are available for you, then you can do it. And once someone, if you will say, does it, then it's jurisprudence for everyone else. But when you begin to understand about your human rights and fundamental freedoms, if you're looking on a personal level to exercise them, you don't have to go so far. Once you begin to contact the minister, remember that the Articles of Law says that they can have another measure. They could produce measures on your behalf to make sure that your fundamental rights and freedoms are being guaranteed. And it's those other measures that we need to start tapping into as Canadian, I shouldn't say that, but as human beings on Canada's territory. Other measures such as what? Such as making an appropriation off of that consolidated revenue fund for a fundamental right. And then if it's denied, because I know some have tried in the past year, there's some that have tried in Ontario. I didn't get to really look at their paperwork, but if it's denied, then you have your leave for appeal to go right into court, to go right into the big court and say, hey, I tried to access my patrimony. What's going on here? I have a human right. I have a need that needs to be met, and you're my guarantor because you signed and stole all my resources here on the land. Most people don't understand or assimilate the fact that a little part of all the wealth of Canada belongs to you. It belongs to each and every one of us. And that part of that wealth that belongs to you, again, finds its expression in a monetary way. So all the gold, all the diamonds, all the oil, all the resources that this great country has to offer, a part of it belongs to us. A part of it monetarily, a percentage of it is ours to use because we were born here. And as being born here, it belongs to us, a part of it. But the Queen, her kingdom, has said that God granted her the right to seize everything on our behalf and to control everything on our behalf. And that's where it's stemming from, where we're losing our access and our rights, where we're being stolen from, and where monetary value is being removed from this country and taken away from us.
So another question, John, is a constitutional challenge the same thing as a class action lawsuit?
A constitutional challenge, no, it's not the exact same thing, because when you do a constitutional challenge on an individual level, it doesn't affect the whole law itself. The judge doesn't go back now and say, well, this enactment is void, or this law is void because you defeated it by a constitutional challenge. What happens is that an injunction, if you will, or an order to safeguard your right, I don't really like to use that type of terminology, but an order to safeguard your right is produced against what you won, against what you constitutionally challenged and defeated. Therefore, whatever yoke they were trying to place upon your life that you defeated through your human rights and freedoms, now there's an order an order to produce to safeguard your rights against this, or an injunction that says you cannot yoke this name or this individual to what you were trying to yoke them before. Clear?
I hope it's clear for them.
Because in Canada, the supreme law is the Constitution Act of 1982. Most everybody is very familiar about that, and it states that whatever enactment or whatever law is subsequently made outside of the Constitution that doesn't agree with the Constitution, it's of no force or effect, meaning that you can nullify it. Now, you can't just nullify it by lifting up your hands and saying, "Oh, this law is against the Constitution Act of Canada, 1982. Therefore, it's of no force and effect. I throw up my hands. Here you go. Haha. You can't do nothing to me because I said so, because I understand, and I declare it." That's not going to work. You're going to get in a lot of trouble. What will work is that you notice that what they're trying to do to you is going against the right that you have in the Constitution Act. And you bring it before them and say, "I have this right that's expressed in the Constitution Act. You are coming against me with another enactment, another law, and you are trying to take away or remove this right from me. And based upon the Constitution Act, you don't have the power to do that. So please stop right now." You understand?
Yeah, another question, John. If the system has bigger teeth than we do, why should they grant us anything? Probably, why would they grant us anything?
Okay, I don't see the system. I understand what you mean. They have guns, they have tanks, they have jail cells, and they have all this. And if they want, if it was like the whole system working against you, they could just beat you up. They could even like chop your head off and just throw you in the forest and you never be found. I understand what you mean. But that's not really my view of the system. And that's not really what I've experienced in the system. As I said, there's a lot of discouragement lower down. Yeah, understandable. But the more you climb that chain of authority that's present here in Canada, you're going to see that the ones higher up understand what's going on. And a legal obligation, a contractual obligation that is binding upon them can be exposed in court. You understand? It's not very difficult. So when you understand your human rights and freedoms, and you know how to express them in law, where to draw them from in law, and then you can point to where they are removing them through their laws, then you create the obligation upon them to rectify it. It's not a question of them being mean. It's not a question of you having to have a big gun to force them to do it. It's a question of they have a contractual obligation, and they will have to fulfill it only when you bring it before their eyes.
Okay, another question, John, is in Quebec, it is called the patrimony. In Canada, it's called the security of the person. Is the security of the person for the legal person or human being?
The security of the person is for the human being. It is they're going to say there's certain law. If you're going to start to study this, you're going to come against two operations of law that are out there. There are one that's going to say that the security of the person is indeed a monetary security. It is something that is there to back you up monetarily. And then there are others that are going to say that the security of the person is security such as like protection against death, protection against robbery, protection against criminal activity, that type of security. Now, when you read in the Constitution Act, Article 7, it says that everyone. Now, there's a video that I released recently where Canada admits to the fact that in Article 7 of the Constitution Act, the word everyone there is specifically, and they claim, only referring to human beings. And that is where you find that it says everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of the person. So if they're referring to human beings, and then they use the terminology security of the person, what do you think security of the person, that three words making up one phrase, refers to? It's obviously a monetary instrument. Because a human being, again, has the guaranteed fundamental rights and freedoms. And some of those fundamental rights and freedoms that are guaranteed to the human being, it takes a monetary expression. It takes a monetary value to fulfill those rights and freedoms. And that's where it's being expressed in the Constitution Act of Canada.
Okay, there's another question in the Skype room here from the chat room. What is this? Is the patrimony the same thing as natural wealth?
Yes, that's a very good question. Whoever that is, congratulations. That is exactly what it is. That's what I'm trying to bring forth here today on the show, that each and every one of us, okay, because we are born here on this land, we have part of the resources or part of the natural wealth of this land belongs to us. And that finds its fulfillment or finds its expression through the patrimony. But the problem is they don't allow us as human beings to access the patrimony because they seize upon it through the person and use it on their own behalf. So while in one way they fulfill the obligation, they create the patrimony, they create the security of the person for the everyone, for the human being, but instead of allowing you to operate upon it, they stick a constructive registered holder upon it and they seize it and they use it for their own means.
Okay, another question is, can any state party to the United Nations run away of its international obligations? This is not just theory.
Very good. Very good. No. No state party is supposed to be able to run away from their international obligations. When you look at the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, it specifically states that the only way that a state party can run away or not fulfill the obligations is through the operations of law that are contained within the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. So when you read that covenant, you're going to see that there are operations of law that are contained within that covenant that give the state party permission on how they can limit rights and freedoms in their domestic laws. But it is controlled and governed. They cannot just decide to ratify or to remove these obligations. They have to follow the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, the structure that is brought forth in there. Now, if a state party attempts to do so after having been a signatory to the covenant, they place themselves in automatic default. And if you're living in a state party that has done so, your only recourse to that would be an international court of law, which unfortunately you'd be hard-pressed to get into there. But the international courts would already be aware that your state party is in default, and there could be some type of protection if you were to contact or some way get in communication with the international bodies and begin to express your human rights, saying, listen, I'm a human being and I'm living in a state where they were supposed to be under obligation to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, but they made some ratifications, and they didn't have any legal right to do so, but yet they're not acknowledging my rights. And I just want to make you aware of the fact that I know that I have these rights, and my state party is denying me these rights. Unfortunately, there are. It's sad to say. Unfortunately, there are some state parties to that covenant that did exactly what that person or what that human had asked about. They subsequently negated their responsibility by creating domestic legislation that said, "Oh, the obligations that are binding us, we're not going to follow them." But the international body doesn't accept that. And that's it for questions.
Oh, there's a lot of them coming in. I'm just waiting for them to type them up. You can continue.
Even the United States of America, it's not exactly the same structure as Canada. It's a little bit different, but each and every human being there, they also have a monetary backing. But you see, America doesn't want to exercise their obligations towards their human beings. So what America wants to do is actually close their eyes to the fact that there is such a designation or such a recognition as a human being or a man or woman within their territory. Canada hasn't gone that far, and I don't think they'll ever go so far.
Okay, they are saying great info and research for Canada, but people are asking about the U.S. You were just saying about the U.S.
Yep, the United States of America has created the same situation. The only difference is that they've created legislation, they've created, if you will say, laws within their Senate that states that they're not going to be obligated to respect human rights and fundamental freedoms. So whatever security is available for individuals in the United States of America, it's appropriated or it's taken for the use of the government. You're stuck in a pretty bad situation in America, because in America they don't want to recognize anything but the people, anything but the person. So you're stuck then trying to find common law. So you have to go then get out of the American system, American commercial law that they have in operation, and what you want to find is common law. Now here in Canada we find common law very easily. We just need to look into the enactments. We just need to look into the charter, and it's full of common law. So we're good to go. You guys, it's not the same thing. So you have to now stand back to where? Either more to a religious context. I know it sucks, but you've got no choice. Or stemming back more from the Magna Carta. I don't know if you are familiar with the Magna Carta. That is where they began to speak about the fact that King James, or King John, he gave rights to men, and that men could be free upon the land. And those rights are supposed to transfer over into, if you will say, the American system. Because the American system, it came out of the British. It came out of the British system. And the British system, if you trace back history concerning it, it was being ruled or under the authority of the religious right, again. And that religious right expressed certain common law rights for men that were available. And I'm being very clear here, certain. And you find that expression in the Bill of Rights of America, where it says that there are other rights and freedoms that are not enumerated in the Constitution Act that are available for you to use. Those other rights and freedoms that are available for you to use but are not enumerated in the Constitution are coming from that common law, if you will say, branch of law that is in America. Now, what they did is, in America, they took ecclesiastical law, they took biblical law, and they transferred it into the court system. Now, you see, when you go into court, you swear on the Bible, and the Bible's present in the court. That's the reason why, is because ecclesiastical law, or the common law that is found in ecclesiastical law, was transferred into the court systems of America through that book. So you can get into the court systems of America, not of Canada. This doesn't stand for Canada when I'm speaking here now. But into America, you can get into the court systems and you can draw out your rights and freedoms as a man under common law through, if you will say, a religious context.
Everybody's saying to say thank you. You're doing such a great job.
Oh, that's okay. It's my second show, so thank everybody for bearing with me. I'm not used to doing things like this. I just
John should be our next prime minister. Tell him to go for office.
Yeah, I wish that I would run for office for one reason, just to let people know that, you know, there's another way to live, that there's another existence to life. It's actually when you understand the consequences on us individually, how the system grabbed a hold of us when we were young. Like, look, for example, we know when we're young, okay, I'm here in school, I got to get an education. Why? What's the point of my education? Well, because I'm going to get a good job. And I'm going to get a good job because I'm going to make money. And I'm going to make some money and I'm going to buy a house and get a nice car and get material things. And I'm going to get married to a wife or to a husband, whatever it may be. But we were already conditioned from a young being into what our structure of our life would be. We were already conditioned into what it is that we would be desiring and what it is that we would be living for. Now, if we just strip away the whole system that's around us and plop us there, boom, sitting on a rock, you understand how different life would be? I'm not talking about how hard life would be because we'd have to find food and there'd be hunters and gatherers. That's not the point of this analogy, if you will say. But what I'm just trying to say is that there would be no yokes upon our lives, no stressors upon our lives that we face nowadays. We wonder why human beings break down. We wonder why human beings are stressed out and need medication and can't handle what's going on in their lives. It's because you were never created, you were never placed, if you will, I don't personally believe, put here to operate in a system like this. And what you're seeing is the default mechanism kicking in of the consequences of us being forced to operate in this way. When you think about life, and even apart from fundamental human rights and freedoms, life and the freedom that you can experience in life, where the commercial system, the government system, the demand for money in order to sustain our life is constantly dragging upon us, constantly weighing us down, constantly attacking us. That's going to affect us, and we clearly see it happening.
Another question coming in, John, is can we settle a court case with our bond?
Yes, you're supposed to be able to settle a court case with your bond because it is a bill of exchange. Now, of course, they're going to want to deny that it's a bill of exchange, and you might even have to go back into court before a judge and say, well, they won't accept my discharge of this debt. But yes, because that order from the judge, if you look into the Bill of Exchange Act of Canada, it's an order from one person to another commanding you to pay money to another person or to himself at a certain date. That's clearly what a Bill of Exchange is. Now, when you sign upon that, and you don't have to accept it for value or whatever, but the operation of law is that when you sign upon that, you're supposed to be able to sign it as the natural person. And that natural person has access to his patrimony. And part of the access that the natural person has to the patrimony is to be able to use the banking systems. You understand? But the banking system, they lay hold of our natural person and act as administrator for it. So they take away our right. But in essence, yes, if you sign that judgment, if you sign that bill of exchange and return it to the court clerk and say, I've accepted it, here you go, they should be able to take it back and they'll make a requisition off of the Consolidated Revenue Fund to discharge that liability.
Okay, the other question is, how do we go about doing that? Do we have to do a claim of right before we can access that?
I say to yes, I say to everybody that you always have to do a claim for recognition or a claim of right first. And you should have it done properly, meaning that you understand you created it, it's your understanding, and have it notarized and placed in a public record. It just means that you go to a notary, you have it, you take an oath before him to declare that what you're declaring is true. It's your recognition, and then he's going to hold it in a public record. And then if you ever need to call upon that documentation in a court of law, they will send it from the notary into the court, and they can't close their eyes. It's just a way to use an operation of law to force the judge that you would be dealing with to take recognition, to take recognition of your claim. So yes, you always have to start with a claim of right, a claim for recognition, and that can only be built after you've taken the time to study and understand your rights and freedoms.
Another question. Here in Canada, we are having problems with notaries. How do we work around that?
Okay, well, let's look at it like this. In Quebec here, I'm very aware that we're having problems with notaries. I have my own personal notary. Everything is good with him, but I was informed by some of the notaries here in Quebec that all of the notaries in Quebec received a letter from their notary association asking them, they didn't call on any article of law, but they asked them if they would refrain from signing or holding any documents for human beings. And they said, we're asking you to do this out of professional courtesy, no obligation in law. So all the notaries know of the fact. You have to pick up the phone and call, and you're going to find some that are willing. I'm sorry, that's the only way. I know it's hard. It's because of the fact that it's a way to kick back against you, because if you have a notarized document that's being held in public record and you call it into court, they can't close their eyes. They have to take judicial recognition. They have to take judicial notice of this. So in order for them to try and fight against this, they're saying to the notaries, don't sign any of these documents. Don't hold them in public records. If you call one and he says no, call another one. If you call another one and he says no, call another one. Or unless you can get a group of notaries together, which is something that's being worked upon here in Quebec presently. If you can get a group of notaries together and they will now lay a charge in Superior Court against their own association, stating that they are pressuring them and that the duties that they are asking them to stop doing, they have the right to perform them. Because these notaries have the right to perform the duties that they are performing, and they are being asked to stop without any prescription of law, without any qualification of law to back them out. Now, you can use 3 witnesses upon your documentations instead of a notary, or you can use a commissioner of oath instead of a notary. But the point being is that you want to have this documentation held in a public record, so if you ever need to call upon it in a judicial way, you can do so.
Another question, John, is can common law be found through the international laws like the UDHR and be presented in court in America?
Common law is explicitly found, and very much so found, in the international laws. It's a beautiful expression of common law. However, in America, you have a little problem. America, they have ratified and they have made, if you will say, legislation against the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. So your way to common law is not going to be the exact same way as Canada. You have to draw your rights from ecclesiastical doctrine, because the United States of America, they recognize ecclesiastical doctrine as common law. Now, unfortunately, or fortunately, depends how you look at it, ecclesiastical doctrine has been transferred into the court system, and the court system has control over any common law that comes out of ecclesiastical law. So basically what I'm trying to say is that if you can find rights and freedoms either in a Bible or anything that has to do with Old Testament or New Testament scriptures, and you can bring out these scriptures that show forth you have certain freedoms, you can call upon them in a court of law in America, and the judge will have to take recognition and grant you whatever it is that you're claiming. Now, I'm not talking about the Quran, because the system, as I said before, comes out of the British. It comes from Britain. We know that the people came over from Britain and they established America, and the religious right or the religious doctrines that America is built upon is Christian doctrine. So you have to, and it's the Christian Bible that is respected in their courts. Unless, like that person said, where they change Sharia law, then, wow, I don't even want to get into that.
I'll have another question here. It's funny. Can we force the notaries? Yeah, he just answered that question.
Yeah, you can force the notaries, actually, even on an individual level. If you go to a notary and you ask him to witness your documentation and you ask him to place it into a public record and he refuses, he has to give you a justifiable reason why he can refuse you. He has to say to you, okay, what you're trying to deposit into this public record, it makes no sense. It has no legal bearing, it has no lawful bearing, and I don't want to hold it for that reason. If he makes that declaration, then you can start a personal, I don't want to say grievance with him, but you can now call him into court and bring it before a judge and say, hey, judge, look, this notary is claiming that my documents don't make sense, but they actually do, according to law. Here we go. Or it's not worth threatening the notary. I mean, there's many notaries. You may call 20, and 20 will refuse you, and 21 will accept you. I had the same problem. In fact, a few people where I live in my area, I used one notary, and then just to witness some documentations, and I sent it out to my local municipal council. And then someone else who had watched my YouTube videos, who lives in my area, they noticed the name of the notary, and they went to see the notary. And the notary said, John sent you. And he's like, no, John didn't send me, but I just put it 2 and 2 together and I came to see you. And he said, wow, since I did his documentation, I've had so much trouble, and I'm having trouble from the notary and trouble from the government, and I don't want to sign any more of these documentations. And I felt real bad because this notary, he was about 60 years old, and he had just had open heart surgery like a year ago. And now he was all stressed out because of what they had done to him. We're down to the last 18 minutes of the show. I hope you've enjoyed the show so far. There's been some different topics spoken about today. It's been very pleasurable for me. I wanted to talk about, before I run out of time, just a little bit about...
Oh, John, we have a caller waiting, and they had dropped off before, so if you want to take the caller.
Okay.
It's area code 514.
Yes, hello?
Hi, how are you?
Very good. Yourself, John?
Very good. Thank you for asking.
I just have a quick question for you.
Sure. Have you enjoyed the show tonight?
Yes, I have. I'm enjoying it. That's for sure.
Thank you very much.
No, you're doing a great job. I just have a quick question for you. I made my way to the United States a few weeks ago, and I had my camera present with me. First things first, they didn't allow me to take a picture of the border. Secondly, I specifically told them that I had personal photos on my SD card, and they still chose to look through it. Is that fair? Is that true?
No, that's not really fair. It was a Canadian border security that did this to you?
No, the American border.
Oh, the American border. Yeah, no, they're gonna tell you that based upon their new terrorism law, that they have the right to override any liberty that you have.
Really?
That's where they're standing right now. Yes, as much as it's sad to say, and as much as it sucks, that's exactly where they're standing. After Obama passed all those legislations and all those laws, they have the right now to bypass any liberty that you find in the Constitution and to apply it against you. And that's exactly the experience.
Whereas if I would have been coming into the Canadian border, I could have said the same thing and they wouldn't have looked through it?
Well, if you came from the Canadian side and they tried to do that, you have rights as a legal person. In Canada, you have the right, certain property rights, certain rights to your property that they couldn't just take it away from you and start inspecting it unless there was a reason. You understand? Unless
that's right.
yeah, a crime or something of that nature, then they could, but they couldn't even just take it on their own and examine it. They could seize it, and then they'd have to get a court order in order to disclose
Mm-hmm.
what was contained in there. So
Yeah.
what you're experiencing in the United States is the clampdown on those liberties that were expressed in the Constitution. But like I was
Mm-hmm.
what I was trying to explain before we went to commercial, when you look into the American Bill of Rights, you're going to see that I think it's Article 9. It states that all the rights and freedoms that are enumerated in the Constitution, they're there for your protection. But there are more rights and freedoms available in America that are not enumerated or listed in the Constitution. And those rights and freedoms you can exercise. And common law rights, as far as I understand, the ecclesiastical rights that are available to you in America, they override that terrorism act. Because when you look at the Constitution Act of America, the only subject that you find in the Constitution Act is a people or a person. And a quick
Mm-hmm.
glance or a quick study of what a people or persons are in legal definitions, you'll find out that that is referring to strictly artificial beings created by law.
Yeah.
But you can
Yeah.
have the rights of a man being brought out through ecclesiastical law or biblical law.
That's right. Well, thank you very much, John. I think you answered my question very well.
No problem, and have a good week.
Same to you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay, as I was saying before we had that nice call, I wanted to talk just a little bit about traveling and driving in an automobile, because I see that there seems to be a lot of problems that are going on concerning that. Now, I put up a video about traveling on my YouTube, so you can go and watch it if you want. And basically the same operations of law concerning registering your vehicle are in operation in America. However, there was one person who made some comments on that video, and they are 100% correct. They, I guess, have done some studying, and they brought out some truth on those comments. They stated the fact that when Ford, GM, or whatever car company it is, produces these vehicles, they are producing these vehicles as a legal person. Ford or GM are legal companies. They are considered artificial beings or legal persons in law. And they are creating products that are put out on the commercial market intended for the use by persons. That is their structure. Now, when you look into what they're creating and you look at the designation that they give to the vehicles they create, they term them passenger vehicles or motor vehicles. These are the same designations of law that you find in the highway safety codes or in the codes that control how a person can drive or travel. So what we're seeing is a legal person is creating a vehicle that is being created for the primary use or the foremost use of a person to be used in the commercial world. And that's the creation of that vehicle. Now, when we buy it and we try to claim that vehicle as our own personal property, as something that is apart from the commercial world, that is not in existence for a person, it doesn't work out. Because one, the manufacturer's certificate of that vehicle is automatically transferred to the state government wherever that car is shipped to. So wherever Ford sends, for example, 25 of their cars, they send it to Washington. Well, the Washington state, the part of the government that is in charge of transportation, they receive those 25 certificates, those manufacturer certificates. Same thing in Canada. When they send, let's say, 50 cars to the province of Ontario, the Ontario Highway Minister, their division, a division of them, receives those manufacturer certificates, and they remain within their offices. By doing so, they are claiming that those vehicles are for the use of persons, and they can never be appropriated into a private use. Now, this expression of law comes out. If you've watched, and I'm losing time here, but if you've watched any of my videos concerning traveling, you'll see that in all of these enactments that they've created in Canada, the obligation is upon the vehicle to have registration and upon the vehicle to have insurance. But there's no obligation upon a human being. The, a human being can use a vehicle that is designated for a person, but without the obligation that a person has. So a person has an obligation to have a license. They have to go through the schooling. They have to pass a test and be awarded a Class 5 license, for example. Then they can use the motor vehicle. A human being doesn't have that obligation. A human being can use a motor vehicle without having a permit or a license, according to Financial Administrator Act, Article 19. However, if the human being is using a vehicle that was created by Ford or GM or whatever subsequent car manufacturer, then that vehicle rests under obligation to have a registration plate upon it and insurance upon it. The only way you can negate that accountability or that responsibility would be that you create the vehicle yourself. You build the vehicle. Therefore, no one else would have or can make a claim that its essence or its initial creation was for the purpose of persons or the transportation of persons. Or you get a hold of the manufacturer certificate. And that is possible to get a hold of the manufacturer certificate if you bring the Minister of Transport of your province to court and demanding that you want that certificate, specifically here in Canada, under your common law rights, because you want to have the title free and clear to the vehicle that you now paid for. Those are the only two ways. If you try to get into a vehicle with no registration on it and no insurance on it and say, I'm driving it as a man, the police will pull you over, and guess what will happen? And you claim to them, no, it's my private property. No, it's my private property. You can't touch it. They'll say to you, you can't drive this vehicle or you can't travel in this vehicle, and we're going to tow it off the road now. But they're going to give you or present you the option. They'll say, can I tow it to your home? Is your home close by? Is there a place where I can tow it to if you're in the area? If not, they're going to tow it to their parking lot or whatever. Now, when they present you that option, when they say to you, can I tow it to your home, it's because they're acknowledging the fact that this is private property. They're acknowledging to the fact that even you're using this vehicle in the capacity as it being private property, but they still have the right to regulate the vehicle, but not the human being in the vehicle. It's really tricky what they're trying to do to us, because in the Quebec Civil Code, Highway Safety Code, it clearly states that a vehicle, it's a motor vehicle, is for the transportation. Now listen, primarily. Now listen to that wording, primarily for the transportation of person and property. Well, they used a distinction there. They said primarily. If they said primarily, that means there must be subsequent ways to use this vehicle. You understand? And if it's primarily for the use of persons or property, then secondarily, a human being can use this vehicle. And so when you take that designation as a human being to use the vehicle, what obligation rests upon you? You don't have an obligation to have a driver's license, because a driver's license is for a person. Well, what obligation rests upon you? They'll claim that the vehicle that you're using is still a motor vehicle. And yes, you can use it as a human being without a license, but you can't use it without it being registered or having insurance, because its primary nature is that of a motor vehicle for the transportation of a person. And that's where they're catching us in the law. And the only way around that is to get your manufacturer certificate or to build that vehicle. And once you can get a hold of your manufacturer certificate, there's an algorithm that you can use to register your vehicle with well, here in Quebec, it's the Register of Personal Rights. You can use it. There's a certain form that they have already present and available for you to fill out in order for you to have rights in that vehicle, where the government and the ministers who represent the Highway Transportation Act cannot seize that vehicle or take that vehicle away from you, because it's no longer designated or it's no longer classified as a motor vehicle for the use of persons. That was a lot to say. Any more questions? Oh, I guess I've been left alone. So that's what I wanted to express. So there is clearly an operation of law that is available, even in the highway safety codes. It comes out. But the problem is they don't want to allow you to exercise that right, because in the Financial Administrative Act of Canada, it states that Her Majesty is the one who grants us the right or the privilege to exercise this right to drive. And to exercise this right, we have to pay money. So it brings money in for them, cash in the bank. So why would they want you to exercise a human right to transport yourself for free? It wouldn't make sense. They lose money. So they try to deny you this right. Driving is not one of the first battles or first fundamental rights that you should try to express traveling. I don't think so. I think one of the first fundamental rights you should try to express is that of taking recognition as a human being and, for example, shaking off a taxation obligation. Because, go ahead.
Oh, we have a couple of minutes left, so before we head out for the night, I was just going to tell the listeners they can go to Freedom Range Radio. They have a YouTube channel. They can subscribe and rate. That would be great.
Yes.
Continue. That was a mouthful, John.
I know. And also,
the question is there any place we can find that info?
Which info?
What you're just talking about. Actually, they're typing. Written down. Is there anything that they can find where they could read?
I have eternallyaware.com or intrinsicfreedoms.com.
Okay.
And I'll also I plan on doing some more work on behalf of the United States of America in the next couple of months. So you can just come back to eternallyaware.com and you're going to see United States of America. There's going to be a page shortly that comes up there, and it'll
this is from the U.S.
Yeah, and it'll begin to explain to you more about your rights and freedoms in America and how to operate under them.
That'd be great because there's a lot of United States questions coming here.
Yes.
So anymore.
I think we're going to call an end to the show. I mean, I enjoyed it. I had a good night. I enjoyed sharing with everybody. And once again, you can go to eternallyaware.com. That's eternallyaware.com or intrinsicfreedoms.com. And please do go to Freedom Reigns at YouTube and add or like Terry said, because it's because of freedomreigns.com that I am having this channel or this show.
Yeah, Freedom Reigns Radio YouTube channel.
That's for sure. And if anybody will be back on air next Sunday, same time, and you can, if you have any questions, you can prepare the questions before next Sunday. You can go and check my website. Hopefully, I'll have that page up with some information to get you guys started, so you'll have a basis, a foundation to start working off of. There are rights and freedoms available for all of those in America that are fed up of what's going on. So fear not. Terry, I thank you for your help. You've been very helpful again tonight. And I must state that it's due to Terry that I am doing these blog talk radio, because she approached me and asked me if I would be willing to come and do these shows. And at first I wasn't very willing, but I thought about it, and I wanted to expose it. I want this information to get out. So I decided that I would do it. So that's the reason why I'm here.
Oh.
Thanks to Terry.
Oh, no thanks, Nita, John. We need this information getting out far and wide, so it's thank you for providing the information.
You're welcome. Did you learn anything tonight, Terry?
Oh, I always learn from you, John.
Well, I hope it works both ways. We all support one another in these endeavors.
It's time to stand together.
Yes. Unfortunately, it's hard to stand together, when people's foundations are different. When people's understandings are different. They say that, you can have different understandings and stand. But it's hard sometimes, Just look at the religious wars all across our world, and then it transfers into this movement. Sometimes it's sad, human nature. But we try our best to support one another, and that's all we can do.
That's all we can do. So we'll call it a night.
Yes, and I look forward to the show next week. And take care, everybody.
Take care.
You didn't find that door, so the blame comes back upon you, not upon them.
I know, but John, isn't it true in the beginning that even if you wanted to exercise them, or if your parents didn't register you, that they would be fined?
Well, that's exactly right, and therein lies where Canada is failing as a state party to international laws, where they are trying to force the people to register the birth of their child. Well, what they do is they approach you as the person, as the Canadian citizen, and they say, you are a Canadian citizen, you are that artificial person in law. As such, you have an obligation. We created an enactment that you are under obligation to follow as a Canadian citizen, which places an obligation upon you to register your child. And if you don't, we can subsequently fine you such and such amounts. But they're not approaching the human being. So if prior to them ever contacting you, you had taken a claim of recognition or a claim for designation here in Canada, they couldn't use or they couldn't hold you to that enactment to force you to register your child. But when you are registered as a child, it's a two-way street here, because they become your guarantor as your human rights and fundamental freedoms. As we talked about last week, some, not all, but some of our human rights and fundamental freedoms, for them to be expressed, for their expression to find fulfillment here in Canada, it takes a monetary value. It takes you to be able to have a monetary backing to fulfill those needs, such as a human being has the right to housing, a human being has the right to clothing, a human being has a right to food, and a human being has a right to the continued improvement of his or her living condition. Now, these are all rights that would require a monetary backing, and Canada is under obligation to provide that monetary backing. So what they do is, when they register your child, the first document that they create is called an act or a registration of a live birth. That is when they register the human being. Secondarily, they create the certificate of birth or the act of birth. That is when they create the artificial person. That documentation is your guarantee. It is your, if you will, it is your share. It is your recognition of the fact that Canada has an obligation towards you, and they are there to fulfill an obligation towards you. Now, the problem is that the obligation that they have towards you as a human being, they nullify by rendering you that person in law. So therefore, any rights and freedoms that you had as a human being that Canada would be under obligation to fulfill, the obligation now falls aside because they are not recognizing you as a human being. They've designated you and rendered you a person, therefore they have no more obligation to that. Now, you create a problem when you realize what's going on, and you turn around and say, well, hang on, I don't want to be recognized as that legal person. I don't want to take recognition or enter into recognition as that legal person. I want to stand under the designation of a human being with all his rights or her rights and freedoms attached thereof. And now there's a problem because their system is not in function. Their commercial system is not in operation to minister to the needs of a human being. It's only been put into operation to minister to the needs of that Canadian citizen, that legal person. And Terry?
Hello. Hi.
Is the show going?
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. You hear me speaking?
Yes, I hear you now. I'm good.
Okay, wonderful.
Doing a great job, John.
So, like I was saying, when we're talking about human rights and fundamental freedoms, we've never been told this fact. So, the government, they lay a hold upon our human rights, or they lay a hold upon us as human beings. How do they do so? They come to your parents and they say to your parents, listen, you just gave birth to a child, and there's an obligation that we have that we want you to fill out these formulas. And when you fill out these formulas, then we're going to register the birth of your child. It's within that action, it's within the context of that action that the legal person is created. That is when the government creates that artificial being in law that has, if you will say, the same name as you or the similar name as you. Now, that legal person that was created in law, you're not told about, and neither is your parents. You just automatically assume that this is you, that this is who you are. So whenever you have any identification that has been given to you or being issued to you from the government, you don't question it. You just accept it. But it's really important to take note that it's at that time of registering your birth of your child that artificial person is created. Now look at this. The government actually forces you. They force you to take recognition as that legal person. Why? because you're under threat that if you don't register your child and if you don't create that juridical personality, that person-in-law, through the act of registering your child, they're going to fine you. Here in Canada, they can fine you up to $50,000 for not filing that documentation. I'm not sure exactly how much they'll fine you in the States, but I did do some research this week, and you guys are under the same obligation that if you give birth to a child in the States, you are under obligation to register the birth of that child. Nowadays, they mostly do it automatically through the hospital. So that would be, if you will say, the first action that creates that legal person. So now you go to school, for example, and you get to be 10 years old, and your parents need a Medicare card for you. So they're going to take that act of birth, that birth certificate that you got when you were registered, and they're going to apply to the government for something that's called a Medicare card or a medical card here in Canada. And that medical card is going to be issued to the person, to that juridical personality, not to the human being. And subsequent, any other piece of identification that you get or you acquire here in Canada is going to be issued to that juridical person, not to the human being. And that juridical person, like I said from last week, is the mechanism or the mechanics or the medium that the government use to strip you of your human rights and fundamental freedoms. So while a human being, for example, is born free and is recognized that it has the right or the capacity to remain free, a person in Canada is a subject or a servant of Her Majesty or of the Crown or of the system. So you see two different capacities or two different attributes that are in operation. One, the human being has the entitlement or the right to remain free and to be free, but the person that they created in law through your birth, through And welcome to Blog Talk Radio, Freedom Reigns, Episode 2, being hosted by Eternally Aware, that being myself, my given name being John, a human being with intrinsic rights. I'm glad you tuned in and are listening to the show today. There's a few topics that I want to get into. One being the fact that most of us, after last week, have been exposed to something that is new to them. They were not aware of the fact that human beings have rights and freedoms that are apart from any commercial rights that are in existence. Well, let's say this, for example. Most of us accept the fact that authority operates all around us. From when we're young, we're kids, we go to school, and we're taught that authority is something natural. We're taught that there's always going to be somebody in a position over us that can tell us what to do. So in a way, we're kind of being brainwashed. And in that way, we're being taught the fact that authority is there to control us. That's part of the essence of them removing your fundamental rights and freedoms, because they're teaching us that whatever you choose to do or whatever expression you want to do, there's a power greater that has a say against you. As we continue to grow up, like we go into high school and college, into the workforce and the like, we're constantly, again, surrounded by authority. So we never seem to question, why is it a fact that the government has the rights over us or has authority over us? Is everything good? Everybody can hear? So that just stems on into our human rights and freedoms. You see, because no one's questioning the fact that there's authority over us and telling us what to do. No one ever questions that, hey, do I have liberty apart from this? Why is it a fact that I have to listen to what these people are trying to yoke me to, or what this system is trying to do to me? So if you will understand, it's a big power that is against us. It's a big power that is working against us even from when we're young. So don't feel bad that you've never really known or never really understood that there were human rights and freedoms there for you to exercise. Now, when we're all born, we're all born free, right? There's not really much that can lay claim to us when we're children. Although the government does do so by the issuance of a birth certificate, we are actually, as human beings, we are born free. And it's when the government comes through the registration of that act of birth that they're trying to lay seize upon the human being. That they're trying to I'm not sure if Deetra seize upon your birth, that person is a subject. It's controlled. Now, as you branch out from that way, there's a whole bunch of different ways that they continue to control you and to continue to take from your life and from your energy through using that juridical personality. Anything to add, Terry?
No, you're doing great.
Well, when you first learned about the juridical personality and the human being, like we were talking about before, and you saw the fact that hey, there was a distinction in law, how did you feel about that they were hiding this from you, that they didn't expose us? It took some effort and it took some studying on your part to understand this. What was your first reaction?
Well, my first reaction, I was very angry. I thought, boy, have I ever been duped? And the second reaction was, that was brilliant. To tell you the truth, I thought the way that was constructed was ingenious, John. That's what I thought.
Yes, it took them a lot. It took them a lot of work to be able to hide our fundamental rights and freedoms. And the question that we asked, and me and Terry were speaking about prior to the show, was that they went through all this to hide our fundamental rights and freedoms, and not just take them away. You understand? They could have just said, okay, well, a human being has such and such right. Well, no more. We remove that right. But they never did that. And why? Why? What is the reason behind that? What's the thinking behind that? What's the motive behind that? Why didn't they just strip us of our rights and be done with it? Why hide them and say, well, if you're able to discover them, or if you go on a hunt or a journey and find them, and you can exercise them?
Because it would be fraud. They had to put it in there.
Yeah, that's true. It would be fraud. But when we were talking, I had the opinion that these laws, they came into existence many, many years ago, many decades ago, even a few generations ago, if you'll say. And most of the thinking of men back then were very religious in context. And they knew that all men, all human beings, have certain rights and freedoms. These are inalienable freedoms that were given to us by our Creator, whatever you want to term Creator, or by natural law. They're just there because after years and years of experience, after years and years of living together, we learned what is right and what is wrong, how we should treat one another. And these rights were brought into existence, and these men, I believe they feared eternal punishment. I believe that they felt that if they stripped us of these rights and freedoms, that when they passed away, they would have no excuse before their God that they believed in. Because remember, all this stems from the Christian doctrine or the Christian belief. And we won't really get into how many different Christian doctrines there are out there, but it stems from the fact that they believe that whoever is ignorant, let them be ignorant. And whoever is intelligent or just, well, let them be intelligent and just. And if they place you into ignorance, well, there's no accountability on their back. The accountability for you staying a slave, or for you staying in servitude, or for you operating under a person which is beneath your rights as a human being, it's your accountability, not theirs. Because they left the way open for you to use, they left the door there for you to walk through, but because you didn't do due diligence, following?
Yeah, so John, if we wanted to rectify this problem, how would we go about doing it? The claim of right would be first, yes, but if we wanted to do a constitutional challenge, would we be able to do that?
On an individual level, or on more
on a mass scale?
It's possible to do a constitutional challenge on a mass scale, but you have to understand procedures of law, and you can't have thousands and thousands of people showing up before court. And neither can you have, if you're going to do what you would title a class action lawsuit, neither can you have a human being or someone who is not a member of the justice system, meaning the barrow, to be representative of that case. So if you would want to have a successful constitutional challenge for something that's affecting a number of us, one or two individuals have to go in there and succeed. And that will create jurisprudence for the rest who are aware. They can act upon that after.
Okay, so now you have that procedure on your flower page on Internally Aware, correct?
I don't actually have any procedure I have certain procedures. I do share information about what the Canadian law says concerning about how to launch a constitutional challenge for your human rights, what courts you need to go to, what codes you need to invoke, who you need to notify. But specifically for a global constitutional challenge for province per province, no. That's something that has to be worked upon, that I've been working upon personally for maybe over a year or a year and a half now. And it's a goal that I have in my own life, that I would like to do that. I'd like to be able to go against the 110 individuals that it would take, because there's 110, if you will say, offices that would have to be served here in Canada in order for this to work, because each province has its own power or its own executive council. Because the way the structure of the law is set up in Canada, the Constitution Act granted the executive power over Canada to each province has their own executive council, and it's that executive council that is responsible for human rights and fundamental freedoms and their exercise and their fulfillment here in Canada. So we would have to bring all those individuals into court, charging them with the fact that they're failing in their duties and in their responsibilities. But you have to understand that in a lot of ways, and I'm not giving credit here to Canada, but in certain ways, when you look into the enactments, as we were talking about before, Terry, they did provide the means for you to exercise your human rights and your fundamental freedoms, but it's hidden in the enactment itself. And unless you know what to look for, and unless you know what you're searching for, you could pass right by it. In fact, if you look here in Quebec, we have something that governs the population. It's called the Quebec Civil Code. And it states that in the Quebec Civil Code that the common law is in there. It's in there explicitly or by implication. So they're telling you directly that the common law is there, but you got to figure out how it applies to your rights and freedoms.
Now, would you be doing that on everyone's behalf if you went against them, or is this for you personally?
Well, if I won my case, if I was able to get together the means to do all this and I won my case, the jurisprudence